Good evening, all, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's story. If you enjoy it, please remember to subscribe and like the video so we can continue bringing you more horror stories. Now, without further ado, take a deep breath and relax as we take a journey through the night. I've always thought the man in the window was just part of life, like the creaks in the floorboards at night, the occasional shadow that flickered past the doorway, or the way the wind howled through the eaves. I assumed everyone had one. He's been there for as long as I can remember, standing outside looking in, watching. At first he was just a shape in the glass, a faint outline that barely stood out against the night. As a child, I would wave at him before bed, thinking it was some kind of game. I don't know when the games ended. Somewhere along the way, he stopped being a comforting presence, and he started getting closer. I didn't notice at first. It was gradual, a step here, an inch there. When I was 12, I could still convince myself he was part of the landscape, some trick of the trees or a quirk of my window's reflection. By 16, I had started sleeping with the curtains drawn, but that didn't stop the feeling, the itch between my shoulder blades, the certainty that if I just looked outside, I'd see him standing nearer than before. Last night, he was at the edge of the yard, not at the tree line, not halfway across the grass, right there, close enough that if I pressed my nose to the glass, I could almost make out his features. Almost. I didn't look for long. Tonight I'm trying not to check. I know he'll be there. I always know. But my eyes keep flicking toward the window, drawn by a pull I can't resist. The room is dim, only the soft glow of my bedside lamp keeping the dark at bay. My phone is in my hands, but I'm not reading the messages on the screen. I'm watching the reflection in the black glass. The man is there. I can see his shape, still and patient, closer than before. A deep breath. I should just close the curtains. I should turn away, bury myself under the covers, force sleep to take me. But my fingers tighten around the blanket instead, knuckles pale. My chest feels tight, like something heavy is pressing against it. What happens if he reaches the house? The thought slithers into my mind unbidden, and for the first time in years, I feel like a child again, small, helpless. Something moves outside. My knees tremble. A shift, a tilt of the head, a subtle change in posture, and suddenly I can see his face. It's mine. My reflection in the glass, but not quite. The same features, the same eyes, but the mouth is off. The expression is all twisted angles, something between a smirk and a snarl. I can't breathe. I stumble back, knocking my lamp over in the process. The room plunges into darkness. My pulse thunders in my ears, so loud I almost miss the sound outside. The creak of footsteps on the porch, the scrape of something against the window. I can't move, can't blink. The darkness feels alive, pressing in, thick and suffocating. My breath is coming in short gasps, chest heaving, fingers clenched into fists. I want to run, but my legs won't obey. The window rattles. I squeeze my eyes shut. Maybe if I don't look, he won't be there. Maybe if I pretend hard enough, this will all vanish. Maybe the sound stops. Silence. I crack my eyes open, heart hammering. The window's empty. The glass reflects nothing but the darkened room, the overturned lamp, the tangle of blankets on my bed. There's no one there. A slow exhale. I force my muscles to unclench, rubbing my hands over my face. Just my imagination. It had to be. A trick of the light, a fragment of some half-remembered nightmare. I reach for the lamp, fumbling to turn it back on. The bulb flickers once, then steadies, casting long shadows against the walls. I shouldn't look outside, I shouldn't, but I do, and he's still there. Not outside anymore. Inside. Right behind me, the reflection in the window smiles. I stood at the edge of the empty city, watching dust swirl through the crumbling streets. The sky was a heavy slate, pressed down like the lid of a coffin. Buildings stood in jagged defiance against time, their windows shattered, their insides gutted. Silence hung thick in the air, except for the occasional groan of a structure finally giving way. I had learned to ignore the sound of things falling apart. They had all been taken. One moment, the world hummed with life. Cars clogging intersections, neon signs buzzing, people arguing over nothing. Then came the light. It wasn't fire, not like an explosion, not heat or fury, just brightness, absolute and cold. I had flinched, closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, I was alone. No bodies, no blood, no clues, just empty clothes and an unbearable stillness. I wandered for days, maybe weeks. It was hard to tell. Hunger gnawed at me, but I never withered. Thirst burned in my throat, but I never faded. Sleep wouldn't come, though exhaustion clung to my bones. My reflection in cracked glass showed the same face, unchanged, untouched by time. My heart still beat, but it meant nothing. I had no place in this world, and yet I remained. At first I screamed. I filled the streets with curses, hurled bricks through windows, smashed every mirror I could find. But the city just swallowed my rage and offered no answer. Then came the figures. They moved at the edges of my vision, silhouettes slipping between alleyways and behind wrecked cars. They never approached, never revealed themselves. Just watched. I knew because I felt them. A pressure at the back of my mind, a cold prickle down my spine. I was their entertainment, a lonely thing writhing in the ruins. One night, I turned a corner and saw a door that hadn't been there before. It was set in the side of a collapsed building, its frame perfect and untouched, standing where rubble should have been. A single bulb buzzed above it, casting a sickly light. The air around it shimmered. My gut screamed at me to run, but curiosity gnawed harder than fear. I pushed it open. Inside was a diner, pristine and bright. The scent of coffee curled through the air, mingling with the sweetness of syrup and the faint metallic tang of a griddle. Vinyl booths lined the walls and a jukebox hummed softly in the corner. Behind the counter, a man polished a glass, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked normal, middle-aged, lined face, tired eyes, but something about him was off. He looked up, smiled. "Welcome. Been waiting for you." I hesitated. The air felt thick, like moving through syrup. "Where is everyone?" He set the glass down. "Gone." I swallowed. "Where?" He tilted his head, considering. "Somewhere else." I stared at him. He didn't blink, didn't shift his weight, just stood there, perfectly still except for the slow, rhythmic movement of his hand on the rag. My fingers curled into fists. Why am I still here? His smile widened just enough to make my stomach twist. "Why do you think?" Something about his voice made my skin crawl. It wasn't quite human, not unnatural, but lacking something vital, some spark of genuine life. I turned toward the door, but it was gone. Just a blank wall where it had been moments before. The man sighed. "You shouldn't have come." My pulse pounded. "Let me out." He shook his head. "Not how this works." The jukebox crackled. A new song started playing, something slow and mournful. The diner lights flickered. The man set the glass down and stepped from behind the counter. "I don't want to play anymore," I said, voice raw. He gave a small, understanding nod. "Doesn't matter." The walls melted away. The counter dissolved. The booth sagged into nothing. I stood in a vast emptiness, a void stretching in all directions. The man remained, but his shape blurred, shifting, stretching. The space behind him twisted, and in that endless black, things moved. Eyes opened, countless and hungry. They blinked in unison, locking onto me. "You've been left behind," the man said. "That makes you ours." I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up in the city again. The sky still pressed down, the dust still swirled. Everything remained the same, unchanged, untouched. But something inside me had shifted. I could feel them now, just beneath my skin, just behind my thoughts. Watching, waiting. They weren't going to let me go. I started walking, knowing I would find the door again. Or maybe it would find me. The city stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of crumbling structures and empty roads. I was its only inhabitant, a rat in a cage too vast to comprehend. I wondered how long before I forgot what it felt like to be real, before I faded into something else, something like them. I wondered what madness was going to feel like. The first night I heard it faintly, just a sound in the distance, too soft to be real. I convinced myself it was the wind, even though the air outside was completely still, even though the noise came from inside my house. By the second night, I couldn't lie to myself. It was sobbing. It drifted down the hall, slipping under my bedroom door, curling around me like a breath of winter air. My heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs would break because I knew that cry. Anna, she had always been a quiet crier, barely making a sound even when she was shaking, her shoulders jerking with each gulped back sob. I used to hate it, that silent grief of hers. It made her seem so small, so fragile. Now it made me want to scream because I had buried her. I had watched the dirt fall, watched it cover her still pale face. I turned on the bedside lamp, breathing heavy. The golden glow pushed back the darkness, but the crying didn't stop. It moved closer. The soft, wet sound of it sent ice through my veins. The doorknob turned. I bolted upright. My throat closed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The knob twisted again, slow and deliberate. The door creaked open an inch, then another, then nothing. The air in the room changed, colder, damp. The scent of stagnant water filled my nose. My stomach turned. I didn't sleep. By the third night, I was unraveling. I stayed in the living room, lights blazing, TV volume cranked high. The crying still reached me. It cut through the noise, winding into my ears, filling my head. It was louder now, wet and choked, like someone gasping for air between each sob. I squeezed my eyes shut. "You're dead," I whispered. "You're dead, you're dead, you're dead." The crying stopped. Silence yawned through the room, deep and absolute. Then, a drip. a single drop of water hitting the floor, then another, and another. The steady rhythm of it beat against my skull. My hands clenched into fists. I turned my head. She stood in the hallway. My lungs locked. My skin shrank against my bones. Anna, but not. Her hair hung in limp, wet strands clinging to her face. Her dress was soaked through, the pale fabric clinging to her thin frame. Dark water dripped from her fingertips, puddling on the hardwood. Her face. I bit back a scream. Her eyes were swollen and red, her lips tinged blue. Water leaked from her mouth as she stared at me, silent, unmoving. Her arms hung at her sides, fingers twitching. I pressed myself against the couch, hard hammering. "Anna?" She blinked, slow. The sound of water sloshed as she took a step forward. I shot to my feet, stumbling back. "You shouldn't be here." A garbled sound tore from her throat like she was trying to speak but couldn't. Her jaw jerked, head tilting at an unnatural angle. Her hands flexed, then curled into claws. The room went frigid. My breath plumed white in the air. Then she lunged. I woke up on the floor, choking on my own breath. I scrambled up, eyes darting around the room. Empty. The puddle where she had stood was gone. Only a faint dampness lingered in the air. A dream. Had to be. Except my throat ached, like fingers had been wrapped around it. I called in sick to work. Couldn't risk people seeing me like this. Shadows clinging under my eyes, hands trembling, heart hammering so fast it felt like I was already halfway to a grave of my own. I spent the day in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying not to hear the steady drip of water that wasn't there. By nightfall, exhaustion dragged at me, but fear kept me rigid. I left every light in the house burning. The TV blared nonsense. I sat curled on the couch, gripping a kitchen knife. The house settled. The wind pushed against the windows. The clock ticked, steady and sure. Then, the lights flickered. The TV cut to static. The temperature dropped in a heartbeat. My breath hitched as ice curled through my veins. Drip, drip, drip. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Go away," I begged. "Please, just go." The sobbing returned, just behind me. So close I could feel the breath of it against my neck, damp and rotten. Fingers, wet and freezing, slid over my shoulders. Clawed hands clenched tight. My body seized. My pulse thundered. The knife fell from my grip, clattering against the floor. A weight pressed against me, cold and heavy. A voice slithered into my ear, garbled and wet, choked with water. I remember. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The images flooded back, my hands on her shoulders, pushing her down, the water sloshing over the edge of the tub, her struggling beneath me, fingers clawing at my arms. The way her body finally went limp, sinking into the bath, the light in her eyes fading. I killed her. Her hands tightened around my throat. Cold, wet fingers dug into my skin as the room spun, my vision darkening. The last thing I saw before the world slipped away was her face twisted in fury. Then everything went silent.